He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're just an organizer. Do not think you're a professional." Everyone in that boardroom laughed. Everyone except me. What he didn't know was that I'd already read the fine print, and in a few days, the same woman he mocked would own everything he was about to lose. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. But before I tell you how I turned his arrogance into his downfall, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to Tales by Lope, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been disrespected for simply knowing more than your boss? My name is Ariel Harris, and for 8 long years, I was invisible, the woman behind the glass doors who made everything run smoothly while the men in suits took the credit. I never complained. I took notes, remembered dates, fixed their mistakes, until the day I watched our CEO sign a deal that would have destroyed the entire company. When I tried to warn him, he laughed, called me just an organizer. But that day, I decided silence wasn't going to protect me anymore. Because when people underestimate you, the best revenge is not shouting, it's strategy. I can still see the scene the way streetlights freeze a moment in a window. I stood at the head of a long, gleaming conference table, sliding fresh acquisition packets into leather binders while the air carried the scent of Polish, pricey cologne, and unchecked ego. Across from me lounged Darius Lowell, chief executive of Lowell Meridian Group, running our global conglomerate like a family crown he'd inherited. He tipped back in his chair and wore the half-smile of a man who enjoyed hearing himself win. "Ariel," he said, stretching my name like a joke, "you're here to keep us organized, not to practice law. Let the attorneys handle the heavy pages." A couple of executives chuckled. He'd pricked the back of my neck, but I kept my face even and placed the binder in front of him. I'd spent 8 years at Lowell Meridian. Started on the front desk, became the person who remembered everything, the clause tucked on page 312, the date buried in an appendix, the footnote that could swing a deal. To Darius, though, I was part of the furniture, useful, quiet, invisible. Today's meeting crowned his favorite story. Lowell Meridian was about to swallow Rail Logistics, a fast-rising, Pan-African supply chain platform with hubs in Accra and Nairobi, tagged at $72 million. The table practically vibrated with anticipation. The close was set for the following week. The glory, naturally, would belong to Darius. As I handed him the latest draft, a tightness gathered under my ribs. "There's a section toward the end you may want legal to re-review," I said, tapping a subsection near the back. "It reads like a back door." He barely glanced. "Leave it." I met his eyes. It's a dormant license provision, section 19.4. It allows third-party assumption of the core software license for a nominal fee if a claim is filed before closing. Darius sighed loud enough for the room. "I've got 3 top-tier attorneys on this. If they're calm, I'm calm. I don't pay you to worry." Silence. A few smirks. I nodded. Understood. Something shifted in me as the conversation moved on. I had learned to swallow barbs and glass ceilings because that was the price of staying in the room. But negligence dressed up as confidence. That was different. That was dangerous. That night, while the building thinned to security guards and the cleaning crew, I stayed. Not to type up minutes. To read. I traced every cross-reference, every definition, every exhibit. The clause was real. It had lived in the original Rail agreements from decades back, and kept drifting forward through each reorganization. It said, in sober type, that someone could assume the software license, the beating heart of Rail's operations, by submitting a formal claim and paying $5 before the merger closed. If that license moved, our acquisition would flatline. My hands shook, not with fear, with clarity. Power in a corporation doesn't sit in the loudest voice. It sits in the sentence nobody reads. I needed a plan. Not noise. Timing. The next morning, the office thrummed with its usual rhythm. Espresso shots, calendar pings, a low buzz of small talk. I sat at my desk outside the executive suite and looked like exactly what people expected, the unbothered assistant who made storms vanish. Inside my bag, a signed $5 money order and a completed claim form. Before sunrise I'd called an old college friend, now in corporate compliance, who confirmed my reading. The dormant license provision was odd but enforceable, and the filing process was public, not proprietary. During lunch, I stepped out into the warm city light and found a neighborhood notary, an older black woman with sharp eyes and a steady demeanor. She stamped the papers, slid them back, and glanced at the amount. $5 to teach a giant some manners, she murmured, amused. $5 to follow the rules, I said. I filed the claim by the book. No company resources, no borrowed authority, nothing sneaky, just the clause, the fee, and the clock. Back at my desk, the world looked unchanged. Marketing gossiped. Finance laughed about golf. Darius was behind glass, preaching synergy. I emailed a brief summary of my actions to my personal account, time-stamped, documented, clean. Then I waited. A day passed. Then two. Doubt crept in. Had I misread something? Risked my career for a footnote? On the third morning, the air in the executive wing shifted. One of Corarel's outside lawyers arrived tight-jawed. Meetings sprouted out of thin air. Whispers broke like foam against cubicle walls. Somebody filed a dormant claim. The license is frozen. They can't close without it. I kept my head down. The man who had smacked at me earlier walked past my desk without the smack. That evening, my heartbeat had a new rhythm, less fear, more resolve. It was working. But men like Darius don't fold. They crowd you. They throw process at you like it's a shield. They weaponize policy until you disappear. The following morning, my phone lit up before I'd taken off my coat. Darius Lowell. I let it ring once, then answered. His voice was smooth, lacquered with corporate nice. Ariel, step into my office. I slid my blazer straight and felt eyes track me as I crossed the floor. Not this time, I thought. Not small. Not invisible. Darius was about to learn what happens when the quiet person reads every line. His office felt colder than the rest of the floor, all city skyline and steel ledges. He stood with his hands in his pockets like a general before a map. Ariel, he said, gesturing to the chair. Sit. I did. He didn't. I'm told a dormant license claim was filed. He watched my face. By you. I followed a public process outlined in the contract, I said evenly. It's a lawful filing. Lawful or not, he said, the smoothness thinning. You had no authority to interfere with a $72 million transaction. I folded my hands. I didn't interfere. I complied with the contract your team chose not to read. His eyes hardened. Name your number. There's a way to make this disappear. I didn't file for money, I said. He paused, recalibrating. Then why? Because you dismissed me when I told you the truth, I replied, voice steady. And because ignoring people who don't sit at your table has become company policy. That ends today. He studied me, jaw tight. This won't end well for you. It won't end the way you're used to, I said, and stood. I reached for the door. He threw one last question like a hook. You think you're smarter than me? I looked back. No. I think I read the fine print. I stepped into the hallway where the whispers swirled, where people measured me with glances and traded theories at the coffee machine. By late afternoon, legal was sprinting. Compliance, alert, HR, suddenly formal. I knew the playbook. Discredit me. Box me out. Paper over the trouble. I had already hired counsel. I had already built a paper trail. I wasn't here to be loud. I was here to be undeniable. The office ran on whispers and calendars, so when the air went thin and quiet around my desk, I knew the counterpunch had landed. At 5:06 p.m., an email from HR blinked onto my screen. Subject: formal review. Immediate response required. They were assessing potential misconduct tied to external interference with corporate transactions. I almost smiled. It was the oldest move in the building. Turn the person into the problem so you never have to examine the process. I forwarded the message to my attorney, Camille Drake, a measured black woman with a courtroom stillness and an eagle's habit of watching before striking. I'd retained her 2 days earlier, the moment I knew the clause would ripple. We'd both expected hours later. We'd both expected worse. The worst arrived at dawn. When I logged in the next morning, my monitor flashed a red banner, access restricted. Contact it. A minute later, my phone lit up. HR, Ariel Harris, the director said in a toneless voice, please report to conference 4B. They were already waiting, the director of HR and a corporate counsel I'd never met. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and new carpet. "We've temporarily suspended your systems," HR said, fingers laced, voice neutral. "Pending review of concerns raised by the executive office. Concerns about illegal, publicly documented filing I completed on personal time with personal resources," I replied. The company counsel's mouth tightened. "Do you intend that as a defense?" "As a fact," I said. I slid a sealed envelope across the table. Inside, a letter from Camille citing anti-retaliation provisions, documenting my timeline, and putting the company on notice that any punitive action absent evidence would be met with injunctive relief. The counsel read it twice. HR glanced at me like they'd expected tears and found porcelain instead. "We'll review this," HR said. "I look forward to your carefulness," I answered, and stood. I left without a login, but with something better, a clean, dated paper trail. By noon, the rumor mill shook itself awake. "She's finished. Why poke the bear? Who even files something like that?" I kept my gaze soft and my pace even. Men like Darius thrive when you run. I wasn't running. At 2, I met Camille in a no-frills cafe 2 blocks away, the kind of place that serves coffee strong enough to mend a week. She slid a thin folder my way. "We'll file a preemptive injunction," she said, voice low. "If they move against you, they'll have to explain, on the record, why they ignored a public clause and then tried to punish the person who followed it." "Darius hates daylight," I said. "That's why we open the blinds," she replied. The following day, the building's choreography changed. Executive assistants stopped making eye contact. Compliance moved in packs. Legal lived in the boardroom. Darius's glass door, usually a museum exhibit of his certainty, was shut, blinds drawn. The rhythm didn't slow, it sharpened. By late afternoon, something new cut through the noise, a call from the chair of the board. "This is Langston Pierce," he said, voice warm enough to listen but cool enough to decide. "We need to talk." We sat across from each other in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor, no theatrics, no entourage. Langston was a tall, dark-skinned man with salt at his temples and the patience of someone who'd learned that silence often says more than a defense. He gestured for me to begin. I didn't perform. I presented. I walked him through the ignored warning, the clause, the filing, hours scramble, its lockout. I handed over copies, the notary stamp, the $5 money order, my personal email records, Camille's notice. No heat, no spin. Just facts that were tired of being overlooked. When I finished, Langston leaned back, fingertips together. "You've put us in a complicated position," he said. "With respect," I answered, meeting his eyes. The complications were already there. "You just can't ignore them now." He considered that, really considered it, then nodded once. "You're right." A slow breath. "Do me one favor, don't talk to the press while we sort this." "I'm not chasing headlines, Mr. Pierce," I said. "I'm chasing accountability." Another nod. "Understood." I left the room feeling the building tilt, just a degree, enough to know gravity had shifted. Monday arrived with a second tilt. No grand announcement. No sirens. But everyone could feel the tremor. Meeting invites reordered themselves. Senior staff drifted toward the top floor like filings to a magnet. HR walked the halls with expressions I recognized. We might have to write this down. By noon, a message found me. Boardroom. Now. I smoothed my blazer and walked the corridor, glass walls reflecting a steady face I had learned to wear. Inside, the board sat spaced like chess pieces. Darius hunkered at the far end, jaw tight, arms folded, the picture of a man who mistook a fortress for a mirror. Langston gestured to a chair across from him, one seat away from Darius. I sat today. The room settled. "We've reviewed Ms. Harris's documentation," Langston began, voice even. "We've heard from legal, HR, compliance, and outside counsel." He let the sentence sit. "The acquisition has been compromised by a critical oversight. That is indisputable. We must now determine how we address both the business risk and the leadership choices that exposed us to it." A murmur rolled the table. Langston turned toward me. "Ms. Harris, did you use company resources to file your claim?" "No," sir. Did you rely on proprietary information? No, sir. The clause sits in public filings. He nodded. Thank you. Then he faced Darius. Mr. Lowell, were you informed about a potential issue with the license provision prior to the filing? Darius's nostrils flared. She. Yes or no? Langston said, not raising his voice, not needing to. A beat. Yes. Did you investigate? A pause long enough to confess. I dismissed it. Silence performed its work. The bard didn't look at me. They looked at him. What followed was quiet demolition. They traced Darius's decisions. The brush off, the failure to escalate, the reflex to punish. Every attempted SME became a receipt. He tried to spread the blame like butter. Legal. Compliance. Anyone but the man at the head of the table. But facts are stubborn, and paper doesn't blush. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to speak. That was the point. The truth didn't require my volume. Langston folded his hands. We'll recess briefly, he said, standing. When we return, we'll deliver our interim decision. Chairs scraped. People exhaled. Darius stared at the table like it owed him an apology. I glanced at the skyline beyond the glass. Steel. Sun. A city that had trained me to be both soft-spoken and unbreakable. The meeting would resume in 10 minutes. 10 minutes before the bard decided what happened to power when it forgot to read. When the bard reconvened, silence replaced the usual shuffle of papers and throat clearing. Every face looked carved from glass, tight, reflective, waiting to see which way the shards would fall. Langston Pierce took his seat at the head of the table, folding his hands with the calm of a man about to light a fuse. Effective immediately, he said, his voice even but final. Mr. Lowell is placed on administrative leave pending full review of his conduct during the Corail transaction. The board will assign interim leadership while we evaluate our next steps. The words landed like a gavel. Darius's jaw twitched. His face went dark crimson. You're making a mistake, he said, the strain under his voice betraying the panic he fought to hide. Langston raised one brow. You made it for us. The room held its breath. Darius's eyes found mine. For once, there was no arrogance, just disbelief, a man realizing the walls he'd built were paper. I didn't gloat. I didn't blink. I simply met his stare until he looked away. When the meeting adjourned, Langston stopped me at the door. You handled yourself with composure, he said quietly. Not many could. Thank you, so. He nodded once. We'll need your help with the transition. Corail's lawyers are nervous. I'll be ready. And I was. Because this wasn't revenge anymore, it was responsibility. The next morning, a company-wide memo dropped into every inbox. Leadership transition, effective immediately. It cited personal reasons. No farewell tour. No press interview. Just a line of text that erased Darius's empire. No one believed the memo. They didn't have to. By 10 a.m., whispers carried the truth. The secretary. The clause. The boardroom showdown. I ignored them. My focus was on the deal. Without Darius, the Corail acquisition could proceed, but only if handled right this time. Langston called me in again that afternoon. He stood by the window overlooking the city. We're reassigning the negotiation team, he said. I'd like you on it. I blinked. As what, exactly? Compliance advisor, he said. Not in name. In authority. I'll accept. On conditions. His brow rose slightly, amused. Name them. I want full oversight on all contract and compliance reviews, I said. Direct reporting line to the board, not to executive management. And I don't want my input filtered through anyone else's approval chain. He smiled faintly. Consider it done. The next 2 weeks were a storm wrapped in quiet. I worked side by side with the legal team, line by line, clause by clause. We scrubbed every page, every cross-reference, every assumption. Corail's attorneys, once smug, now cautious, treated me with measured respect. They had learned that the quiet ones sometimes carried thunder. When the final documents were signed, the deal was airtight. No loopholes, no oversights, no arrogance. The press called it a triumph of reform. Industry analysts called it a model of accountability. But for me, it was personal vindication. A proof that diligence, when weaponized against power, could become its own kind of justice. That evening, the city stretched out before me in gold and navy, the skyline glowing like something earned. I stood in the same conference room where it all began, same polished table, same view, but this time, it didn't smell like someone else's empire. It smelled like mine. 8 years. 8 years of being underestimated, side-eyed, talked over. I used to believe hard work alone would earn respect. It doesn't. Sometimes you have to claim it. Stand in the quiet until your presence becomes undeniable. Langston stepped in, carrying 2 coffers. You know, he said, handing me one, the bard's been talking. That sounds dangerous, I teased. He chuckled. We're creating a new division, risk and contract strategy. We want you to lead it. Reports directly to the board. I stared. You're serious? I am, he said. Because you didn't just protect this company from a financial disaster. You protected it from itself. I didn't know what to say for a moment. Thank you, I managed. I'll make it worth the faith. You already have, he said, smiling softly. Now make it official. The next morning, I moved into my new office. It wasn't grand, no corner windows, no gold plaque, but it was mine. And for once, no one questioned why I was there. I spent the day rebuilding the compliance systems that had once failed me. I drafted a policy that required every employee, from intern to CEO, to read the risk summary of any major deal. I called it the transparency clause. The irony wasn't lost on me. By evening, the halls quieted. My reflection in the glass looked different, steadier, whole. As for Darius Lowell, the last I heard, he'd taken a consulting role out west. Smaller company, smaller spotlight. Maybe he'd learned humility. Maybe not. Either way, he was a chapter behind me. Because some battles you fight for money, some for power, and some just to prove that being unseen doesn't mean being unimportant. I hadn't set out to win a war. I'd only refused to lose quietly. And that, in the end, changed everything. The day the new Rail deal officially closed, it didn't come with champagne or applause. No, it came with quiet handshakes and the kind of nods that mean we finally did something right. For the first time, every document was clean. No buried clauses, no ignored footnotes. The lawyers read aloud each key line like scripture. Every signature that hit the page felt like redemption. When the final pen lifted, Langston turned to me. You've done exceptional work, Ms. Harris. I smiled. We all did. But I knew what he meant. This victory wasn't just corporate. It was personal. It was about rewriting a narrative that had always said people like me belonged in the background. Later that night, I stayed in the conference room long after the others left. The skyline pulsed against the glass, Atlanta's heart beat alive beneath the fog of evening lights. My reflection stood in the window, same woman, new gravity. 8 years of being invisible. 8 years of smiling through disrespect, of knowing more than the men who dismissed me. I used to think survival meant silence. Now I knew better. Survival meant strategy. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of the table, the same one where Darius once laughed at me and whispered, "You should have read the fine print." 2 weeks later, Langston appeared at my door holding a folder and 2 steaming cups of black coffee. "You busy?" "Only with the usual," I said, setting aside a stack of compliance drafts. He slid into the chair across from me. "The board's made a decision. Officially. They want you to lead risk and contract strategy permanently. Title, Director." My breath hitched. "That's permanent." He smiled. "Yes. Full authority. Report directly to the executive board. Salary and privileges adjusted accordingly." I leaned back slowly, absorbing the moment. "Why me?" Langston's eyes softened. "Because you didn't fight to humiliate anyone. You fought to protect integrity. You exposed arrogance, not to destroy, but to repair. And that's leadership." For the first time, I let myself exhale deeply. "I'll accept," I said. "But only if I can restructure how this company handles compliance. No more blind spots. No more egos deciding truth." He laughed lightly. I expected nothing less. My first day in the new role was surreal. HR issued my badge with a gold trim. My nameplate gleamed on a modest glass door that read Ariel Harris, Director, Risk and Contract Strategy. No corner office. No marble desk. Just a workspace that faced the city and the quiet satisfaction of knowing Ida and every inch of it. Employees who once walked past me without notice now stopped to greet me with genuine warmth or cautious respect. I didn't need either. I needed consistency. So I got to work. I revised reporting systems, implemented ethics checks, built a training program for junior staff, and created a mentorship initiative for women of color in corporate law and operations. The program's slogan read, "If they won't open the door, build your own." A month later, at the quarterly board review, Langston introduced me to industry press as the strategist who saved a sinking ship. Reporters asked how it felt to go from assistant to director in less than a year. I smiled into the cameras. "It feels overdue." They laughed, assuming it was humor. But Langston understood. He grinned quietly beside me. Behind the smiles, though, I stayed grounded. Success has a way of attracting envy, and I knew better than to assume everyone wished me well. Darius still had friends here and there, loyalists nursing bruised egos. But I wasn't afraid of ghosts. If anything, I was ready for them. That evening, I walked home under a sky painted in burnt orange and violet. The wind carried the scent of rain and possibility. Somewhere between streetlights, my phone buzzed, a message from a blocked number. "You think this is over? Be careful what you build. Ariel. Some people don't forgive." I stopped in my tracks. No name. No signature. But I knew exactly who it was. A small, wry smile tugged at my lips. I typed one line back. "You should have read the fine print." Then I blocked the number and slipped my phone into my purse. Because fear was a language I'd forgotten how to speak. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. The culture inside Lowell Meridian began to shift. The interns spoke up more in meetings. Junior analysts started double-checking work instead of nodding along. People referenced the Harris Clause whenever they caught an overlooked detail. I became a symbol I never intended to be, not a hero, not a rebel. Just proof that diligence and dignity could still win in a world obsessed with shortcuts. And while my name now appeared on memos, contracts, and executive reports, the sweetest victory was invisible. The quiet knowledge that somewhere in the company handbook, under compliance integrity, my work was now policy. The months that followed felt like waking up after a long storm. The company had changed, not overnight, but in rhythm. The air in the halls was lighter, the silence less tense. People met each other's eyes again. I wasn't naive enough to think I'd fixed everything. Power doesn't dissolve that easily. But for once, integrity wasn't just a word in a training manual, it was a habit. Langston often joked that I had rewired the company's DNA. I'd laugh and tell him it wasn't me, it was the fine print finally doing its job. Still, I knew the truth. This one had come at a price. There were days I'd walk past Darius's old office, now stripped of his nameplate, and remember what it felt like to be invisible. The laughter that used to sting. The comments that made me shrink. The moments I'd swallowed pride to keep a paycheck. But each time those memories rose, I'd glance at my door. Director, Risk and Contract Strategy. My name carved into glass. And I'd remind myself, I didn't climb out of those shadows to stay humble about survival. One Friday evening, as the sun bled orange across the Atlanta skyline, I packed my laptop into my bag. The office was empty except for the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Langston appeared at my doorway, tie loosened, the same easy calm in his eyes. "Headed out?" "Trying to," I said, smiling. He leaned against the frame. "You know, the board's considering formal recognition for what you did with Cora Rail. A commendation, maybe even a bonus package." I shook my head. "That's not necessary." He raised a brow. "You earned it." "Maybe," I said softly. "But what I really earned is freedom. That's worth more." He nodded, understanding. "You've changed this place, Ariel." "Not me," I replied. "Just the standard." He smiled. "Still, I'm proud of you." When he left, I sat back for a moment, letting the silence stretch. My reflection stared at me from the window, older, steadier, unapologetically whole. That night, I drove past the city lights and found myself in the neighborhood where it all began, a narrow apartment I'd once shared with 2 roommates and too many dreams. The same building that saw me stay up till 2 a.m. studying contracts I wasn't paid to understand. I parked for a moment and just looked at it. Back then, I thought success meant getting a corner office, earning enough to buy silence. But now I knew, success meant never being afraid to be seen. I whispered a quiet thank you to the girl who stayed up reading fine print when no one cared. She was the reason I could walk into any boardroom and never flinch again. A few weeks later, the company announced its next major merger. Reporters asked if I'd be involved. Absolutely, Langston told them, but this time, she's leading from day one. I laughed when I saw the headline, "The woman who turned the fine print into power." And though I'd never chase fame, I didn't shy away from the truth either. I had changed the rules by simply following them, completely, carefully, courageously. The last time I saw Darius was at a financial summit in Chicago. He was consulting for a smaller logistics firm. Same polished smile, same cologne, but less noise around him. He noticed me across the room, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, I wondered if he'd nod, maybe even say something civil. Instead, he looked away. And that was fine. Because forgiveness doesn't always need a conversation. Sometimes, it just needs distance. Months later, I received a framed copy of the Cora Rail Integrity Award the board had created in my name. It would be given annually to any employee who courageously protects the company's ethical standards regardless of rank. I hung it on the far wall of my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Power isn't about titles or offices. It's about what you do when no one's watching, when you choose integrity over convenience, principle over approval. That was the lesson Darius never learned. And it was the one I'd never forget. That evening, before locking up, I stood by the glass window and looked out at the city that had once made me feel small. Now, it felt different, like an open book. The skyline shimmered, the same color as possibility. I lifted my cup of coffee and whispered the words that had started it all. Read the fine print. Because sometimes, the quietest details hold the loudest power. He once said I was just an organizer. But the truth, I was the architect of his ending. If this story gave you chills, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to Tales by Laura, and turn on your notifications, because every week, I drop stories that remind you that being underestimated is the best setup for a comeback. Tell me in the comments, my lovelies, have you ever been overlooked, only to prove them wrong in the end? I'm reading every story. Your story could be next on Tales by Laura. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, the kind that can't be handed to you, only earned when you refuse to stay small. He called me just an organizer. But the day I read what he ignored, I became the woman who organized his downfall.